general Muslim and he's seeking the truth, and you tell him that no opinion of any man can go above what the Prophet ﷺ said, because what the Prophet ﷺ said is not mere opinion. Because the Prophet ﷺ never spoke from desires. He never spoke from ara, from himself. وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. Allah said in the Quran, he doesn't speak from his own wishes, from his own desires. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Rather, it was revelation that was sent down to him, alayhi salatu wassalam. Can you say the same about Abu Hanifa or Malik or Shafi, even though they are our imams? Abu Hanifa is our imam, rahimahullah. So is Malik, so is Shafi, so is Ahmad ibn Hanbal, so is Bukhari, so is Ibn Majah, so is Al-Zuhri, so is Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani, Fudayl ibn Iyad. All of these great scholars of the Salaf, they are our imams. But not a single one of them is to be taken as one man, to be blindly followed to the exclusion of everybody else, as if all of the knowledge of the religion is in that one man. Now when you're giving da'wah to these people, they'll listen to you. They'll accept some of that and they'll say, that makes sense. If he's sincere and honest. But as I say, the problem is here, the harakiyin, the people of the movements, of the political movements. They say, forget all about this kalam, these Salafis. Look, why are you getting into all of this for? We have to liberate Gaza. Forget about all this speech. Forget about Tawheed. What's Tawheed? Listen, these people are dying and you're talking about the three categories of Tawheed. You're talking about the names and attributes of Allah. You're talking about the bridge over the hellfire. How's that going to stop the Jews from attacking Gaza? So now, because he's hearing what we've got to say, and then they're listening to that, and then, of course, the strength of social media and the strength of, mainstream media or legacy media is that they've got the visuals, they've got the optics, right? Because they're the ones who are showing bombs getting dropped. They're the ones who are showing children dying. So you want to talk about Tawheed? Whilst 65 children died today, and 15,000 have died since the beginning, since October the 7th. And you want to talk to me about the names and attributes of Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ascending over his arsh and descending to the nearest heaven in the last third of the night. You want to talk to me about how to pray? Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. You're going to quote to me hadith that pray like you have seen me pray. And people are dying. So when the person is faced with these two, a da'wah that calls him to this kitab, sunnah, the way of the Sahaba, and this is where success lies, and a da'wah that is pulling their emotions. We need to do something. We need to vote for the right party. If you're sitting in the masjid studying these books, Ibn Majah, you're studying these books that were written over 1,200 years ago, 1,100 years ago, and you are studying the books of Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, and you're studying the books of these ancients, what do they know? How are you going to learn what's happening in the world today? We need to go out and vote. Did you cast your vote? Did you put your vote into the ballot box? We have to put the right party in charge. Then we can influence them, and then they'll stop the bombing. Yeah, right. And how has that worked for you over the last 60 years? 70 years, 80 years, as Sheikh Muqbil said. Where did it get you, these intikhabat? This casting your vote, where did it get you? Demokratiya, following the principles of democracy, that we should mobilize the Muslims and vote for the party that we want in power. So what? Has the bombing in Gaza stopped since yesterday and today? So all of these Muslims for the last, 2 months? Just canvassing. Vote, vote, vote. Everyone's glued to the screen. Everyone glued to their phones. Just looking at who's going to win. Maybe the Muslims in Britain somehow are going to stop the war and stop the killing of our brothers and sisters in Gaza because of what you supposedly were supposed to do yesterday. So anything changed? 1 million people marched in London. 1 million in 2001. Over 1 million. The whole of London was blocked in 2001. Obviously, some of the youngsters wouldn't know that. Why? Because they said we don't want Afghanistan and Iraq to be, we don't want Afghanistan to be bombed. And we don't want Iraq to be attacked because this has got nothing, this so-called war on terror. What's it got to do with the average Afghani or the average Iraqi? Why are you bombing these places? So millions of people in Britain, in France, in Germany. Muslims and non-Muslims, by the way, not just Muslims, not just, 1 million Muslims were in London. No, it wasn't. In fact, the majority were non-Muslims marching. It was the anti-war protest. 2001, 2002. So, can we assume that the bombing stopped because 1 million people marched? What did they get out of it? They bombed these countries and they stayed in those countries for nearly 20 years. Made no effect. So now we're sitting in the masjid and we're teaching the people Tawheed. Does this have an effect upon the people? The answer is yes. Because your children are learning the religion, and when they die, they will die upon Islam. When they are in their graves, they'll know what to say, because they lived that life. They knew who their Lord was, they knew their religion, and they knew their Prophet. They had ma'rifah and they had iman. They had knowledge and they had iman. And they practiced their religion. So that when death comes to you, or comes to your children, and comes to their children, they're upon iman. They're not linking arms outside the Houses of Parliament. And that's their, what was your great act of piety when you were alive? I linked arms with communists and socialists and lesbians and gays, and we were out there marching for Gaza. That was your great feat and your great contribution to Islam. Where's your children? Well, my son married his boyfriend. Because when you take your eye off the ball and you take your eye off what is important, then shaitan, obviously, you're talking about establishing justice and religion in other parts of the world. You can't establish it in your home. You can't get your wife to wear the hijab. So it's easy, right? Because let me think about something that is 3,000 miles away, so I don't have to think about something that is, 3 meters away. So I don't have to think about my wife. Or the wife doesn't have to think about her husband who smokes, 10 cigarettes a day and watches movies all night. Because she's really into boycotting and marching and signing petitions for Gaza. Because that's what it does. You forget about what is important, what you need to focus upon. Things that you cannot change. Meaning, physically you can't change because you're not in a position of rulership, leadership. You're not a general of any army. You're a taxi driver or a teacher or an engineer, or you're on the dole. Right? Whatever you are, you do not have that authority to make any change anyway. So what do? You learn the deen of Islam. You learn the Sunan of Ibn Majah. You learn Kitab al-Sunnah. You learn Sharh al-Sunnah. You learn Kitab al-Tawheed. You study Usul al-Thalatha. You learn what is obligatory upon you from the legalities or from the legal rulings of Islam, the Islamic law. How to purify, how to pray, how to distribute, the inheritance after someone's death. If your mom dies and your dad dies, every single number that is haram and every additive that is haram. Now your mother needs a ghusl, a shrouding, a janazah, and a burial. I don't know what to do. That's what happens. Your father's dead. What do you do? What do I do now? Okay, he's died now. What do I do? My wife just had a baby. What's the first thing I should do? I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll turn on my phone and play an adhan into his ear. That's what they think the deen of Al-Islam is. Right? Because why? We've changed our, the priorities, the essentials of the religion are being forgotten because we're not studying the books of aqīdah and creed and Islamic law and sharia and aḥkām. The fact is, our children don't know how to pray. Or when I say our children, Muslim children don't know how to pray. They go to schools where they don't pray. They are teenage boys who are men in schools across this country who haven't prayed Jum'ah, who don't pray Jum'ah months after month after month. But their parents are active, in politics and voting this one, and let's vote Labour, or let's vote out Labour, or vote this one in, vote that one out. And your son doesn't even pray. Your daughters don't even cover. Your daughters are teenage girls and they're going to school in skirts or trousers with a cardigan on. And you just believe, well, that's the best I can do because the school won't accept anything else. Right? But when it comes to Christmas, they're celebrating Christmas. You know, they're giving out Christmas cards to each other. Birthday comes, they're giving birthday cards to each other. The teacher that's teaching them is in a mini skirt. Right? That's the teacher, and that's a man. That's what's happening in state schools. I'm not saying it's every state school, but that's not illegal. It's not illegal for a male teacher to come in and say, well, I've basically transgendered. So, you know, yesterday he had a beard and he had a gruff voice. Now he's got a wig on and a mini skirt with high heels. They're teaching your children. So what do you do? And you think that the solution is what? We forget all of this and look at Gaza and look at Kashmir or look at, you know, the troubles in the rest of the world. You can't change those troubles except by raising your hands and making dua. But your dua will be accepted if you're upon piety and tawheed and the correct aqīdah. And you are giving sadaqah. And you are righteous because the dua of the righteous is accepted. The dua of the madhloom, of the oppressed, is accepted. So where are you, my brothers and my sisters? Where are you with respect to this study? And it was supposed to be hadith 151, but I don't want to, if I start now, then I won't finish. Because actually, one of the reasons why I've said what I've said is because this hadith drove me to it. Wallahi, this hadith, when I was reading through the hadith and the explanation, it kind of like, just, raised something in my heart about how those Sahaba, they suffered. And that's why actually I've given this introduction. And the first part of the hadith is the words of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ said, I was harmed in the cause of Allah as no other. And I suffered fear in the cause of Allah as no other. I spent 3 days wherein Bilal and I had no food that a living person could eat, except that which Bilal would conceal under his armpit for us. That's what they went through for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we don't want to learn this because we think there's more important things to learn. And that's what drove me actually to say, give this extensive muqaddimah to today's lesson, because if that doesn't affect your heart and that doesn't make you ponder over how the likes of the Prophet ﷺ and Bilal bin Rabah stood by the Prophet ﷺ, suffered as the Prophet ﷺ was suffering, he suffered. Prophet ﷺ was going hungry, he went hungry. Just as the Prophet ﷺ suffered fear, he suffered fear. They tortured him, they beat him. And the hadith that comes in the next chapter, the same thing. You look at Khabbab ibn Arad. He went to visit Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu. Umar said, come and sit right. You sit here. He gave him a place to sit in his gathering that is only reserved for the people of honor. And he said, no one has more right to this than you, Ya Khabbab, except for Ammar ibn Yasir. And we studied Ammar ibn Yasir and what he went through. Except for Ammar ibn Yasir. Then what does Khabbab do? Khabbab starts to show Umar ibn Khattab the scars on his back. The scars on his back that the pagans punished him with and tortured him with in front of Umar ibn Khattab. This is the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they suffered with and they fought for and they faced hardships for in the cause of Allah fi sabilillah. Wa jazakumullahu khairan. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Can a person take knowledge from Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali? And what is the ruling on studying mantaq? Then Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali is from the Asha'ira. He went through various stages in his life. Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali or Al-Ghazali. Both pronunciations are mentioned with respect to him. So Al-Ghazali, then, he was a philosopher. So when the people say, well, he refuted Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi, in fact, he declared them to be kuffar because they were Aristotelian or Neoplatonists. And in those days, Aristotelian ideas of philosophy and Neoplatonism were considered to be the same. You know, they never really distinguished, and they thought it was one and the same, even though there is some difference between them. So he refuted Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi and Al-Kindi. He declared them to be kuffar because they said that the universe is eternal and that the bodies will not be resurrected on Yawm al-Qiyamah, that the resurrection is the resurrection of the soul, and they believed in the transcendency of the soul, and they believed in a form of, you know, the hellfire isn't true and the paradise isn't true and so on. So he declared them to be kuffar. But he never left the principles of the philosophers of the ancient Greeks. He was a philosopher himself, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. So can you take knowledge from him? No. And he was a staunch defender of the Ash'ari stroke Mu'tazili aqīdah. He wasn't Ash'ari of the likes of Abdullah ibn Kullab, who died in 240. Abu Hamid, I think, died in 505, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe someone can look it up. 505. But Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was not upon the creed of the early Ash'aris. It was more like a hybridization and an evolution of the creed of the Ash'ira that went from one extreme to another. And he was in that age of the philosophers, the Mu'tazili philosophy type of Ash'ariyah. And he went through periods of his life, I think it was for about 10 years, in which he was in total confusion, and he left his home, left his family, and he just went on some journey trying to find himself. And of course, the people of philosophy and tasawwuf, because he found mysticism along the way, so he embraced mysticism. So that's why they say that Abu Hamid al-Ghazali is a mystic, Sufi, a Gnostic. He's also a philosopher who took from the Greek philosophers in many of their principles, including the various ideas of the philosophers and the Ash'ariyah. So he believed in Kalam theology. He believed in this idea of Huduthul A'rad fil Ajsam for the proof of the creation of the universe. So he used the ideas of the Ash'ariyah in that regard. So he wasn't Ahl al-Hadith in any sense of the word. In fact, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said about him that it is astonishing that the likes of Abu Hamid, that his knowledge of Hadith and the authenticity of Hadith, whether it be Bukhari or Muslim or other than them, is no better than an average person from the general Muslims. He had no knowledge of Hadith. He wasn't a person who gave importance to Hadith. The Sufis, obviously, they have a title for him. You know what they call him? Hujjatul Islam. That's what they call him. However, without going into too much detail, he was misguided for all of his life practically. He was a Gnostic, a Sufi mystic, Ash'ari, with a great influence of the Mu'tazila. He was a philosopher, not as extreme in his deviation. Of course, he didn't reach the level of the likes of Ibn Sina, who became a kafir because of his claims about the universe and Neoplatonism and so on. And likewise Al-Farabi and Al-Kindi before him. He didn't go to their extremes. That's why he refuted them. That's why when you speak to the Ash'aris, they say, no, he's not bad because he refuted Ibn Sina. He refuted the philosophers, but he didn't refute the philosophers because he had a problem with philosophy. He just said their ideas of Greek philosophy or mantaq or logic and rationale and philosophy, falsafa, that Ibn Sina has gone too far. That was his problem. He said, if Ibn Sina didn't go that far, he'd be okay. He should have done what I've done. But the thing is, where do you draw the line with philosophy? What, is there any text in the Quran and the Sunnah that tells you, well, you can have this amount of philosophy of the Greeks and not that amount? There's nothing in the Quran and the Sunnah. All of it is forbidden because all of it is just falsafa and ara and opinions. So Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he wrote, of course, Ihya Ulumuddin, that contains huge amounts of fabricated narrations that are munkar, reprehensible, and lies upon Allah's Messenger, stories of the mystics and the Sufis that are basically tantamount to kufr, some of them. This is Al-Ghazali. But it is said, same as what he said about Fakhruddin al-Razi, because Fakhruddin al-Razi went through the same, turmoil in his life. So when they come to the end of their lives, Al-Ghazali, it is said that he repented. They say that he died with Sahih al-Bukhari upon his chest, repenting from all of the bid'ah and the philosophy. Throughout his life, by the way, he went through stages of mental and spiritual turmoil and struggle. Throughout his life, Al-Ghazali. So before he died, he realized that all of this that I've been pursuing is nonsense. So he repented and died with Bukhari, they say, on his chest. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if he repented, may Allah accept that tawbah. And even his students would say that about him, that we don't know what's happened to him. Meaning when he went into his period of mysticism and philosophy, even some of his students would say that he went so much into philosophy and the philosophy of the Greeks and Neoplatonism, Plotinus and those people, that he went into their philosophy, and once he entered into it, he couldn't find his way back out. That's what his students said about him. But it is said that he repented at the end of his life, and they say the same about Fakhruddin al-Razi, who was also of the same ilk as Al-Ghazali, that both of them repented right at the end of their lives. Wallahu a'lam. So that is Al-Ghazali. Don't take anything from him. Let's call it a day today. I think I've gone over what I intended, and maybe we can save these questions for next week. Wa barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullahu khaira. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.